Today we will discuss about servlet programming. Okay, we'll go to the theoretical part first. What is a servlet and what is a servlet programming? Why do we need servlets? What actually servlet is doing for us? Okay, now let's start with the servlet. So basically, these servlets are nothing but just server-side programs. This is also written in Java, but where do we run this Java servlets? They are not like our Java applications. With the main application, with the main method, we are running our Java applications. But servlet will not run like that. It does not require main method to run that. It required a web server to run our servlet programs. That is the reason we say that servlets run on the web server. We will discuss that in depth. What is a web server and what is a container, servlet container, and what each of this doing for us. Okay, why do we need a servlet? Servlets are basically used to create a web pages. What type of web pages is dynamic web pages, and it process our request, means client request. When the client send a request from the browser, then it takes the request and process that according to the given input and return the response back to the user. So whenever we send a request from the browser, in the sense, we know, right, as we are using a browser in our day-to-day usage, right? For example, we take Google Chrome or IE, Firefox, any browser. So if we send a request, in the sense, means we are opening a browser. So what type of request we are sending? HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Using HTTP, we are sending the request to the backend system. That backend system has to accept this HTTP request. But what actually they are doing before the response is coming back to the user? It read the request from that and process the logic. Where do it process that logic? It has to invoke some servlet. If you go to any other applications, like any framework, Spring MVC starts, or go to Spring Boot, anywhere, without a servlet, your web request will never be served. Servlet definitely will be there, embedded. You cannot see that. This is the first level of the servlet, means olden way of using servlets, means olden ways how they are using, right? We are writing that servlet programming from the scratch. Now in the market, we have Spring MVC that starts and the Spring Boot, right? Nowhere we don't see that servlet programming directly in return. That is embedded. That is comes as a built-in program that frameworks, means it eliminates that writing of this servlet code for us, for the developer. He just call that methods available to the servlet that we will discuss in the next part. So first, before you go there, first you have to understand the basic working of this servlet, what actually the servlet is doing for us, right? It takes a request, process the request, and send the response back. That response is, again, it is not only the servlet is doing that. Servlet have some methods. Okay, what type of method you are sending? Are you sending the request to get the data or to post the data? If you look at that, right, in servlet we have n number of methods are there, right? To process our request, we have n number of methods. To post, right, for example, now if you say, if you look at that, when you send a request from the browser, okay, there is an, right, this guy is there as a servlet container, and this guy wants to get the data from somewhere, right? That is from another layer. When the request comes here, from here, this guy contact this one, and this guy process the logic. What you are looking at, it is not only resides in this servlet, and it required to connect to the backend system. It could be a database, right? Our database, it may be any database or any storage location. So it get the data from here and send, and the servlet store that, and then it send the response back to the user. So what things are happening? This guy send it, and this goes, it will not directly goes here. This guy will send to here. Later, the servlet then send the response back to the browser, means to the user from where we are requesting. So this is how internally the servlets do a request and response. Now let's see that step by step what actually it is that. Now why this servlets interact with the database, that's what we see. They provide a platform independent and a scalable and efficient way of handling request and response, right? This servlets also runs inside our JVM on the web server. This also need a JVM, but where these server programs are running on the web server, because the servlets are the web application. Why do we need a Java, this servlet? It is a Java class. In terms we say this can be used to extend functionality of a web server. Web server is giving some functionality to us, right? That we have to extend the functionality of the web server. Now, when a client sends a request to the web server, the server passes this request to the servlet, right? That servlet is capable of handling this request. Once the servlet receives the request, it has to perform the actions. What actions? Based on the request we are sending to the servlet. Either we are just logging to the page or we are trying to access the data, right? No matter, however, right? Depending on the request. Based on the input request, the servlet do that and return the output, which means returning the response is based on always request only. If you are sending something, servlet is giving something, is not a. Let's take an example of that. If you open a mobile, if you want to see the list, right, history, the call history, call data, where you go, then you go to the corresponding icon, then you open the right page to see the call data, to whom you call, okay, whom you call, missed calls, received calls, everything you can see. Means you are giving the right input, you are going to the right place to see the right data, which means you are what request you are sending, it gives that only. If you open the WhatsApp, you cannot see your call data, right? This is what based on the request, then the response that correspond response will be returned to the user. Now, see, we every time we are saying servlet container web server, what it is, just look at this picture. So this is how the servlet container looks for us. All these are the client places, means client request. Client request plus nothing but the browsers from where user is sending the request to the servlet. Before it goes to the servlet, who do that? The web server. The web server resides in the browser, right? What this web server do this? The web server takes the incoming request, okay, and send to the container, right? It invokes the servlet container. The servlet container resides in the web server. This servlet container is like a box, means it is like a container. No, container contains many things, right? Its servlet container contains the n number of servlet. It's not only one servlet. All the servlets that we created in the application will be placed in one common place, that is called a container. In terms of servlet, we call it as a servlet container. All our servlets will be live here. Means the moment to start the application look at the class which are marked as a servlet will be sitting here. Then later for request, then this will be start serving to the client request. How you do that? You send a request from the browser, the web server look at that, right? What the web server looked at? If you are sending a request from the browser, there is some pattern, some path is there, right? You are sending a request with /login. or list or add, delete something, right? The action, you are sending some action to do the action to a particular servlet. But again, which servlet has to handle that action? Right? All the information will be stored in some web.xml file. So there is a development descriptor. Okay, that we'll see in the during hands-on. Based on the incoming path, this web server identifies, oh, this path slash XYZ is there, but XYZ is mapped to which servlet? Because every action is mapped to some servlet, right? In real-time scenario, you have n number of servlets are there. Which servlet has to process that action? And it's a path. Based on the path, which servlet I should invoke? That will decide by the web server. Once it identifies the path, right? The same path may be to, suppose if the same path maps to two different servlets, then it checks the path map to which servlet, then it invokes that guy, hey guy, there is a request coming to your servlet, and process this request. Before it processes the request, it checks what type of action you are sending. Action is nothing but it's a posting action or get action, right? What type of action? Either you are posting a data or you are sending a request to get the data. So based on the action, it invokes that method. Before it invokes that method, right? That methods are nothing but a service methods, which means it is serving our request and send the response. So we call it as a service method. Do get, do post, do delete, pass, so many things are there. Okay, I will show you that one by one. So the service method is the main method which actually serves the user request and then send the response back. Before it invokes the service method, it do some process. What is called that process is called a life cycle. So it has to for the servlet process, follow the life cycle methods. What life cycles methods are there? The main thing is called as init method, service method, destroy method. If you look at this picture, if you look this one, right, there is a service method. The moment client send the request, it will not directly call the service method. Every framework, every technology, right, there is a life cycle for that, where it starts, how it starts, where it ends. And servlet also have a life cycle. This life cycle have these three methods. In general, we see that it look at the picture, it's showing five other, but all these are not lettered. The main methods of this servlet life cycle have init, service, destroy. But why do we need this is that when somebody send a request to this servlet container, right, the servlet container has to load that servlet class, right? That is the first step, as mentioned as a first step. Means it has to load that class, right? Hey guy, please wake up. There is a request comes to you. When that guy loads, it has to create an object, right? Without object, you cannot serve the request, right? As we see in previous videos, the core Java also, to invoke a particular method, right, using object, what we do first, we have to create an object to that class. Then based on the object, which method we want to invoke, which method we want to call, then we say object dot that particular method. We pass arguments of no arguments, whatever it may be, based on the method signature. So that is the reason servlet also, first once the servlet is loaded, it has to create a server instance, then start with the life cycle methods. What is the first life cycle method? Init. Init in the sense it is the initial phase before the service method call. If anything that need to be loaded as a part of init method, it is not mandated to always have some code in the init method. It is depend on the requirement, our use case, we have to code in that init method. For example, just take our best example is we have a database connection. Assume database connection can be created only once for the entire scope of an application, right? Which means once you create a database connection, you should not expect, we can't expect to create the connection again and again for every request. So that is the init is the right place where we have all this type of logics to place in the init method. Well, if you place the database creation connection creation in init method, the init method is called only once, right? No matter how many times you invoke that servlet, it never call that method init method again and again, again and again. Once it call enter once for the life of a servlet. Life of a servlet is until you destroy. Destroy in the sense what? If you shut down the application, your application, the destroy method gets called. I will show you how this is calling on init method and service method, destroy method, how this is working during hands-on. So when the init method is called, then that will store the things ready for you to before it delegate the request to the service method. The moment to send a request, it will not directly go to the service method. First, it will contact the init method. Okay, do all this stuff, one time configuration related thing, and then invoke the service method. It can be of do post, do get, whatever it may be, based on our requirement. Then this service method is the actual guy who performs our request processing and then send back the response to the user. And in case in future real-time application, right, you may not have a single servlet in our application. You have a number of servlet. How do you differentiate? But how this web server differentiate, that we will see during hands-on. Okay, leave it right now. So you are clear about the servlet container. A servlet container is simply considered is a box type box which holds all the servlet. All the servlets resides inside that container. When the request comes from the user, the web server is responsible to invoke that particular servlet to process the user action, user request based on the action. In the request, you have action. What action the servlet wants to perform? Post or get. So based on that, the servlet container invoke that servlet and let him go ahead to process that user request. Sometimes somebody say that servlet engine. What is a servlet engine? There is no separate meaning that. Servlet containers are also, we call it as a servlet engines because they are the engines, means they are the one which are responsible to invoke those servlets, right? Execute that servlet and managing the servlet. Everything is right. The engine consists of number of things to manage that system. That's why we call it a servlet engine. So this servlet engine or servlet container is the main part of the web server that will interact with the Java servlet. So the servlet container is the responsible to communicate between the client browsers and the servlet. This servlet container also responsible to manage the life cycle of our servlet. What is the life cycle of a servlet? Loading the servlet, instantiate the servlet, okay, and calling the methods. Not only in that, it before it instantiate the method instance, what it do that, right? As you see that when you create an object, what it do? It allocates some memory, right? The same way when servlet container load the servlet, right? It needs some memory, so it takes that responsibility also. Servlet container load the servlet into memory and then start initializing. Once the initialization is ready, then only it start invoking the methods, right, until to destroy. If you think that some web server, what does we keep saying that web server, web server? A web server is nothing but the one which contain the web functionality. Which means all our HTTP requests are the web requests. So these are all the servers which contain the capable of serving this web request. You think that how many types of web servers are there in the market? Web servers, the first thing is that Tomcat. If you say Glassfish, that is also a web server. And you may heard about that JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere. What about those? Those are application servers. How do you differentiate this application and web servers? Application servers contains the web servers. Application server content more capable of serving this. Means they are used to serve enterprise applications. This is only just the web request only. This application servers like JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere, all these contain on a high level. Those are application server that can, right? They will process, they have some high capabilities. But inside that, by default, all web server components are available, which means your application server can serve applications at the web servers also. So a lot of containers are there in the market where whichever application you are using, no matter what is application server, web server, it is capable of serving your request. Means web servers. Every containers almost have the functionality of a web server. Okay. Now a servlet container, again, last step. It is a program that runs on a Java web server and provides the runtime environment for us. For us means for Java servlet. And actually, how this servlet contains these methods and from where these methods are coming, or do we need to write these methods as a custom? No, it's already coming from javax.servlet.package. See that from where it is coming and how we are doing and what we are doing. Just look at this example. Now, before you go to this project, you no need to worry that how do I create this structure of the project. There is nothing in that. If you have Eclipse, just go here, new, and say project, and you want to choose the type of project. If you look at that, you have a number of options are there. It is a Java project? No. What type of project? It is a web project, right? Say choose under the web, you see that dynamic web project. If you don't find that, you just say type web, then you could see dynamic web project. Then you chose this dynamic web project. Okay. Next, it will ask you to give the project name. Okay. Just give my servlet app, anything you wish, what you want to. Then the next step, then it ask you here the target runtime. Target runtime, what is the target runtime? Where your application has to run in which web server. So you have to specify that. If it is already there for me, right? So it is not. If you don't have that, go here, new runtime, select that Apache version, Tomcat version you have 8.5, 809 or no matter. Then say click next and then finish. Then you could see it will be listed in this drop down. If you don't have the one, please download and make it available. Otherwise, if you try to save this also in the next step, it expects you to browse that. If it is not there, you just click this button, download and install. And then it will download and install the one for you and will be available in this runtime. Then choose this the dynamic model version. It is saying the servlet version is 3.1. Okay. Then click next and you could see where your classes will go there and the output folder. You do nothing here. Then go on next. Make sure select the generate web.xml descriptor. It is a that I told right. It is a deployment descriptor. What is this deployment descriptor? I will show you. Okay, in this example, this guy This is we call as a deployment description. Why we call as a deployment descriptor? This guy contains all the information related to the servlet. Not only servlet, it contains everything that how our application gets deployed, when to, right, when and how things should work. When we deploy the application, this guy gets invoked first, and it will read that server read the deployment descriptor, and then go ahead for the deployment. See, whatever you have mentioned, you have specified in this web.xml, according to that, the web server read this and configure your application and make it available whenever we require, which means that this guy is that contain the description about how the deployment will happen. If there are, say, sometimes in our real-time scenario, there are listeners, servlet listeners also there. The listeners, filters, everything. So these classes has to invoke first, right? The listeners will work first. The listeners will do certain job for us to load the default configurations or to read that data, some external blah blah, whatever it may be. These listeners will invoke first. So we have to descript here in this web.xml. Based on that descriptor in that web.xml, right? Whatever we describe, then it read that and start your application to behave that way. That's why we call it as a deployment descriptor. The moment to deploy, this file get read first and then give that instructions to the application which class has to invoke first, what it has to, and what is that. And if you have two files which gets invoked at the same time, we'll have some option out there. What is that? Load on startup. The servlet which load on startup, if you define the highest priority, sorry, the lowest priority will give the highest preference. The highest priority will give the lowest preference, which means that if I give priority is 1, then that have the highest priority, means that is the lowest number, then it give the highest priority. If you give 2, that is the highest number, but it's the lowest priority. So that's why we call as a lowest number with the highest priority. Then once you click finish, then all the structure will be created like this. Okay, you don't have this anything in this, that you have to create this folder structure manually. So this is how the basic structure of the servlet gets created. From here, you have to write everything from the scratch. What to do? First, we have to think that what we are going to write, that what kind of servlet I need to do. What is my requirement? Right. First thing that, then go ahead to start citing the servlet. Right. Before knowing that anything what you want to do, right? You cannot start that. What is your requirement? Then first analyze that thing, that what you are going to do, that then go for writing a code. Okay, that we will see in the next lecture. Okay, about detailed overview of this servlet methods and the working of the servlet. And this